Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Genre Blender podcast, where we explore what makes stories stick from the page to the screen. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Kris, and today we are finally talking about The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, an 1890 classic, which I've been begging Ryan to read for some time now. So you have read it, which is fantastic, and went down the very educated route according to the notes that I have on my screen right now.
I don't know about that. I
We'll
just
see.
word
We'll
vomited a
discover
whole bunch of
as we
notes, so-
as we go through the topic today. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about this book with you.
Yeah, and also this is your favorite book that you've mentioned before on the podcast and elsewhere, which is also why I wanted to read this one above all the other million classics that are in my on my TBR. Because I was curious what it was all about.
It may change from my favorite one now that I'm reading more classics, because I feel like prior, I mean, it's my favorite book in terms of where it sits and how long the
Yeah.
learnings have stayed with me. But we'll see. We'll see. Give it another 12, 24 months, because I am reading more classics these days.
Oh, 100%. And you're allowed to change that, by the way. Like, that's totally a thing that people do. And that's the whole point of reading. You find ones that resonate with you even more.
That's why people have top 10 lists every year. Let's read all these books and they get knocked off. But we'll see. As current favorite book.
Yep, that makes sense. And also a happy birthday to you, Kris, because it was your birthday very recently. So
thank you.
Say that for everyone to hear. I might do something in post. I might put some balloons or something. So you'll see. That.
It was the singing at the restaurant last night which really got me in the embarrassment.
Okay, let's before we dive into The Picture of Dorian Gray, let's do a little bit of a read, watch, play like we usually do. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I really haven't been doing a whole lot of watching, to be honest. We finished The Penguin finally. I feel like that's been a long time coming, so we only had the last episode to go, and all the acting in that was brilliant. Then we went down a deep dive because watching it with the housemate, and Jim was like, "Oh, when's season 2?" I said, "No, it's like a limited series. It's now done. It's in place of movie 2. So you've got the Batman, you've got the Penguin, and then you've got movie 2, which I thought is a really interesting way to set up that world, and it opens it up for more limited series to introduce the villain. So I assume the Penguin is the villain of the second movie. So we've got a bit of backstory, and then we've got the second part of Batman or whatever. But all the acting in that was incredible, down to the kid actors that they had in there. Just fantastic. So really enjoyed that. Gaming, I finished Grimshire as well. Like, I finished the early access of Grimshire, and I clocked in at 48 hours over about a month. I think I played it from when it dropped to finish early access. Fantastic. Very much struggling to go again and play again and see what I can do better because of the learning curve, which is not something I generally do. It's like, I've learned all this lessons now. How can I be better in the next playthrough? So really struggling to hold off until full release for that to happen.
Yeah, wow. I forgot it's not even released yet. That's crazy.
No, it's just an early access. So I also started a game called Discounty, which is sort of Stardew, but like in a supermarket vibe. I don't think you'll like it at all. I don't think it's going to be your thing.
No, I did see, I think it was on the Nintendo Direct, and I was just like, yeah, that's your game, not so much mine.
Look, it's enjoyable. It's quite small. Coming from something like Grimshire, which in early access is huge for like an indie title. So it is quite small in terms of the area that you're able to go and explore in, but it is very much one of those games where I can turn it on, play for 20 minutes, turn it off, and go about my day. And then I also started Tiny Bookshop, which we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully. So I've played about half an hour of it. I have some very early thoughts, one of which is I don't think this is a game for me, but I do think this is a game for you, which is quite interesting. I will give it a couple of hours, though, before I go in and we talk about it a little bit more. So I don't know if you've started it yet, but I think you'll enjoy it.
I have. I've played a couple of hours. And
a couple of hours?
Now that you say that, yeah, I've played a couple of hours. Now that you say that, maybe. I didn't really think about whether you'd like it or not, to be honest. I was just having a good time with it. I don't know. We'll see.
Very able to turn it off after 28 minutes and not think about it again. But we'll get into that discussion next time, because that is the episode that we'll be doing. So
Hmm.
it takes me to reading. So I've read a couple of different things over the last little bit. The first one I'll talk about is a book called The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is fantasy, sort of my bread and butter. Now, a lot of people I trust really love this book, and I enjoyed it, but I nitpicked the hell out of it, which was quite interesting because a lot of people that I trust were like 5 stars, fantastic. But I found myself really picking it apart. And I think maybe that's because of the hype. It's like, well, why is this 5 stars for people when like this, and this are happening? And I know that things like repetition are a me thing. I know that I don't like it. And I found a
Yeah.
lot, so that's going to irk me already. But there were certain like story choices in there where, again, I was like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand where all this praise is coming from. Not that it was a bad book by any means. Like, fantastic world building. One of the characters was really fun, and like I really enjoyed her. But like a lot of the other characters fell flat for me. I'm not sure where I landed on that one. And one that I quite liked, which is not my normal go-to in terms of genre, was called Lady Tan's Circle of Women. And this is a historical fiction where we are following 2 women of different backgrounds in 15th century China with a very patriarchal society, very limited view on what women should and should not be doing. And we follow one woman who comes from wealth and has a relatively privileged life, even though it is still very patriarchal. She needs to follow certain rules. And we also follow her friend who they are in the same circle throughout the entirety of their lives, but one is well off and one is not. And the conversation around feminism and being able to take power in very like small ways in this society and how it's used to build each other up. And then you talk about people like concubines with the women in power. If they can't produce a son, then you will often have concubines who are able to produce male children. And I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was really well written. I had a great time with it. Definitely won't be my last book that I read from that particular author. And then I started this one this morning,
Oh wow.
and I
Nice.
have read 80 pages in about an hour and a half.
Wow. Okay, for the audio listeners, Kris is holding up
Leviathan
Leviathan
Wakes.
Wakes by James S.A. Corey.
And I bought the second book
You're kind of blowing
yesterday.
my mind.
I didn't think I would enjoy it, but I can definitely see the bookish popcorn references because every chapter is like, oh, I'll just read one more. And I'm at chapter 8.
Nice.
So, yeah, I can see this one being one that I just blitz through. I am having a little bit of difficulty with how many characters there are at the moment. So I've had to slow down in like the last
Yes.
chapter that I've read because there's just a lot of people. But yeah, having a blast so far with it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. You've just blown my mind a little bit. It's interesting you mentioned about the lots of characters because you're right, there are a lot, and I've forgotten that the first book, they obviously it introduces all of them and kind of right at the beginning. But interestingly, because that's usually one of the things that I have a big problem with, and I didn't in that book, so I don't know why that is. I guess it's maybe a testament to the writing itself, but I'm glad to hear that you're having a good time with it, and I can't wait to talk about that one with you, and I can't wait to finish the series myself as well, so we can actually talk about it properly.
I love how diverse
Yeah.
this is in 80 pages. Like the amount of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
cultures and that we've got in here is outstanding.
And that diversity only increases the whole series through as well, which is great.
But I'm enjoying it, and I thought I would pick it up. Similar, because it's one of your favorite series. Okay, I'll go and do it. And I've had it on the shelf for a while.
Nice.
So yeah, we'll give that a go.
Yes.
Hoping to finish that one this week.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. I'm going to be grinning through the whole episode now. That's great.
Until we get to the arguments, because there's a note in here where you don't agree with me.
Yeah, maybe. Respectable debates, though. Cool. Well, I have finished. I've actually had a week of finishing stuff, which is great and mostly unheard of for me. I finished How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, who I mentioned that one, that book, last episode. Loved it. I think it's quite brilliant. I loved the writing. I thought it was written really well, but it's like a bunch of smaller stories that are interconnected. And I think I preferred the earlier stories compared to the later ones. I think it did lose a little bit of something towards the end, a bit. Could just be me and my attention span. I don't know, but I do recommend it. I think it's quite a lovely book, but also a very emotional book, and you kind of, I mean, I didn't really prepare myself going into it, and there was one story in particular that just kind of got me in the feels, like a freaking stab in the heart with that story. It was the story about the pig that I mentioned last episode. But anyway, it was quite great. And then, of course, the Picture of Dorian Gray. So I spent most of that time the last week just finishing that story. Not reading much else. I haven't read more of The Stand. We'll come back to that. I've got like a tiny bit left. But
It's a
hopefully, maybe
pretty
today
big
I'll
effort
try and
though,
finish that.
because The Stand, like,
Thank you.
no
Yes.
shade, but like the reading pace that, like, I know that you often take a lot more time with your books, and that's not a bad thing, but you like to really experience the books, whereas sometimes I feel like I'm just churning through it.
Yeah.
That is a 1,300-page book. That is
Yeah.
that's a chunky beast, and you've done it in like a
100%.
month-ish.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
with other
amazing.
books as well. Yeah.
In preparation for Exodus.
Yes, I know, right?
Casual 900 pages for September. It's fine.
This is the practice round.
Yeah.
I think, look, Stephen King's one of probably the few authors where I would be able to sort of read it a little bit faster than typically, just because it is such a page turner. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why I've been able to read it so fast. But also because I have 3 copies of it. I've got the audio, I've got the digital version, and I've got the physical, and that helps as well because I can literally read it anywhere. There's no excuse. And that wasn't intentional, by the way, just in case it sounds like I'm just being like a bit overkill. I had all these versions already. Thought I'd make use of them.
And you just bought the short story collection, right? I saw that in the shop yesterday, but I didn't pick it up.
I forgot about that. Yes, I did come prepared. Yeah, it's the end of the world as we know it, and there's a bunch of authors that contributed work for this one. I'm actually really stoked to read this one. Yeah. But yeah, other than that, for watching, I've actually been watching Alien Earth. The first 2 episodes. I know there's a few more out now. Loving it. It's great. Loving that. Some problematic writing, I guess. Kinda. It's not like I don't love it more than I love Alien, but I
was going to say, this is one of your favorite franchises?
Pretty much, yeah.
It's up there. Yeah, okay.
It's up there, and I think this is quite a love letter to like the original Alien film. So there's a lot of things that are kind of throwbacks to it. There's a lot of visual, like the actual cinematography of it is very much a throwback to the first Alien film, which I love. So there's lots to like, but I'll reserve judgment just in case it takes a bit of a nosedive in the last episodes. I don't know. It's getting good reviews, so anyway, I'm quite hopeful. And for gaming, I've been doing quite a bit as well. So I'm almost finished Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I've been sinking quite a bit of time into that. So hopefully by next episode that's actually done and dusted. I was waiting for a Switch 2
to be played list. It's been around for a while. I feel like it was back in streaming days, wasn't it?
Long time. I think close to when I stopped streaming. So it's been a while. But I stopped playing it for a good long time, and then when the Switch 2 came out, I put it down because I thought there'd be a upgrade, for the frame rate or the resolution of it, but there hasn't been. So I was just like, I'm done waiting. I'm just gonna finish it. So I've been playing that, and then I picked up just for shits and giggles one that it's been on my list forever, which is Persona 4 Dancing All Night, the rhythm game that's a spin-off to the Persona 4 game. Persona 4 is probably one of my favorite games ever made. So, I kind of just wanted to just experience the characters again and get a bit of a nostalgia hit, I guess. And yeah, it's fun. It's super fun. So I'm just having a good time with that. But I also just related to gaming because I've also just bought, it's not arrived yet, but another retro handheld gaming console because I'm right back there. Just wanting to play all these old games again. So yeah, so we'll see when that arrives. I might play a whole bunch of SNES and we'll see GBA
Wait,
games.
is this one of the ones that have like the little game cards in it and they've got like 1 billion games on it? Yeah, okay, I'm quite interested in like a review of these because like I don't think I'm technologically adept enough to set these things up. So as much as I want them, I'm sure there is more, like you've got to install emulators and shit. And I have zero knowledge about
a lot of them come with it pre-installed, so you literally don't have to do a thing if you don't want to. You can, of course, and I've already gone down that rabbit hole, before, especially with my PS Vita. But yeah, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to at all. But yeah, I will let you know what it's like. It's a little flippy one, like the Game Boy SP.
Oh yeah, I love
Game
that.
Boy Advance SP.
Had one of those as a kid.
Yep. Yeah, I never did. So reliving my childhood. But anyway, yeah. So I've been gaming more than anything else lately. But yeah, that's me.
Nice. That was a chunky read, watch, play update.
For
I feel
both of
that
us too.
we had this
Yeah.
time around. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm not writing at the well, I'm not
Yeah.
writing my book at the moment. So I'm like, oh, I've got time to actually do other things.
Yeah. Can actually enjoy some stuff for a change.
Yeah, yeah.
Funny how that works.
Cool. Well,
So,
let's jump into the Picture of Dorian Gray.
indeed. So, Kris wrote some notes, and then I wrote more notes. So now we have a lot of notes. So I'll be reading from some of these notes, just FYI for anyone
There's a
listening.
few notes.
But I think we're probably going to try and structure it in a semi logical manner. I think the first thing you put on the list was first impressions, which I think is a very good place to start. So let's start there. So so this is the first time I'm reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and Kris has read it before, though you listened to it on audio this time around, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, yes. Yeah.
I did a bit of both, by the way. I listened to some of it, and then I read it, and I think I listened to the same version that you had. I can't remember I did not prepare the narrator's name.
Russell Tovey.
Yes, and I sought out
Yeah.
that one in particular after sampling all of them, and I ended up really not liking it, which is why I mostly read it. He has a very particular way of emphasizing the words and weirdly, and which is fine a little bit of the time, but he kept on doing it, and it really got under my skin. So I kind of ditched the audio version at the end. But there's lots to choose from if you're
Isn't that
reading
funny?
this. And
Yeah, there's
yeah,
heaps, right? Once I got used to his inflection, so when I started, didn't like it at all. But once I was used to the inflections and the way that he spoke, it was fine. But I had to like really train my brain.
yeah,
But also because I know the story, I think I was better able to go into it.
yeah, 100%. So my first impressions of this book. So, and I don't really have a good answer for you here. I know you're probably dying to know what I thought about it, but I don't really know, and I've been thinking about it so much since I finished it, because I think what's happened is that it's one of those books that I can appreciate so very much. But if you ask me, did I enjoy the experience of reading it? Not as much as I thought I would. Not compared to a lot of other classics that I've read.
It took you a while, didn't it, for this one?
It did. I had to put it down and read other stuff, and I just wasn't in the mood to read it. And I'm trying to treat myself a bit kinder when it comes to reading stuff, because again, I'm not reading this for university. I'm not reading it for any particular reason. It's for us and for enjoyment and discussion. So I was like, I'm going to put this down, read something else. I did enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I did enjoy the book, and I think it's brilliant. I don't know if it was what I expected it to be, but I think the problem here is that I think I enjoy the meta narrative of it, the discussion, the discourse of it. Now it's 135 years later. It's hard to separate how I actually felt about the story itself, because I can't really take that away from like the discussion around the book and Oscar Wilde as well, and how much of a parallel there is between the book and his life, of which I knew a little bit, but have read more now since we read the book. So I think, I think what I enjoyed most was the meta narrative around it, but also like the various ways that you can read this book as well. If you just take it at surface level and asked me, did I enjoy the story? It was okay, fine, it was whatever. But what is interesting is like the number of different ways you can read it, and I think Oscar Wilde is quite brilliant in that he's been able to write that into the book during that time, and then of course now 135 years later we can read it in more ways.
We're still talking about it. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think as a second time reader or second time consumer of the story, I definitely got more out of the alternate themes, whereas when I read it the first time many years ago, full spoilers by the way, this book was released in 1890, so if you haven't read it yet, then we will be talking spoilers for Dorian Gray. So I think when I first read it, it's a hugely reflective piece, right? It's and I think this is why it stands up in the modern context, is because it is you can attribute this story to many different facets of life, and although Oscar Wilde might have been talking about one or two particular things like indulgence and queerness, and we'll get into some of the themes, you can really take the concepts of the themes and apply it to different things that we're seeing in today's society. So I think the first time I read it, I was like, okay, we're talking about youth and beauty, and that's really what I took from it the first time that I read it. And verse reading it as a second time, I took more from the complicated ways that we as humans can be quite duplicitous in our own lives, and the way that that can reflect in many, many different scenarios. So I read more into that. I also completely had forgotten the first 30% of the book, where we're talking about Basil and his painting, and the young Dorian Gray with our young Lord Henry as he grows into his age, and some of that romanticism that he has around those topics. I've completely forgotten. I was like, oh, interesting, when I read it the second time. So that was quite, again, hugely reflective on both accounts, but I was 10 to 15 years younger the first time that I read it. Yeah. And I wasn't concerned with my own youth and beauty at that stage. Whereas coming into, and particularly in transitioning and seeing the different society expectations on male v female, I think has also played a part in the second reading of it, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It's something I hadn't really thought to talk about much, but I'm curious whether we will revisit that later, is the fact that when we, in particular, read it, we have also another level of reading, in the sense that we've gone through a gender transition, and that changes the way you view certain things as well. So yeah, that's fascinating as well. So you touched on a couple of things there. So like the youth in beauty, and sort of the corruption of youth being a central theme. By the way, maybe we should do a brief synopsis of the story as well. I don't know if you can wrap it up in a paragraph. You could say that the story is about a young man who
you put me on the spot there.
Yeah, I know. A young man who so he's very, very beautiful, everyone wants to be him, or be with him. He exudes beauty, and he gets a portrait painted of him by his friend Basil, and in a kind of Faustian bargain kind of situation, he sort of wishes that he would keep his good looks and his youth and his beauty, and the portrait of him takes all of the corruption and things in his life instead of him, which is exactly what happens. And he goes through his life, and there's a lot of pleasure seeking that happens. You could say he was corrupted by his friend Lord Henry, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Yeah.
What a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the out of all of the characters in many classic books that I've read, he's definitely up there as one of my favorite characters ever written. So yeah. So book I was kind of but the actual character of Lord Henry, adored him. I think he's absolutely brilliant. So and then of course the ending of the book, and as Kris said, full spoilers ahead, but yes, he essentially descends into paranoia and madness, and in a moment of rage decides, no, he's going to destroy the painting, and of course he ends up being destroyed himself, and he becomes the old withered man, and the portrait is back to normal. So that's on a surface level. That's it's not a, by today's standards, it's not a story that's unique, really. It's kind of that kind of story has been told before, but it's all of the other stuff that's all of the themes that it touches on that are super interesting to me. So do you want to tackle these theme by theme, or how would you like to discuss all of these with these copious amounts of notes?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of themes in here, and you were right in saying that this book can be interpreted several different ways. And one thing I will say for anyone who's interested in getting into classics who don't really know where to start is these Penguin classics, even before we get into the story, they offer introductions, which really helps to deep dive into some of the thematics. So if you are someone who wants to know prior to going into the book to try and get some context, the Penguin Classics really do have quite a good resource in the beginning of their books to help with that. So there are several themes that they have at the beginning of the book, which potentially we could run through. But I think the core themes, and very central to the story, let's talk about things like, I think if you're reading this at surface level, you're going to come away like I did 15 years ago with youth and beauty and what that means. Let's go a little bit deeper to some of the underlying themes, like the leading a double life, and we can probably relate that to Oscar Wilde's own life.
Yeah.
You want to start there?
I think, look, when I read this, I I found it kind of telling that um it wasn't explicit in Dorian Gray's crimes. Like it doesn't actually say what he did in the book itself. Like it's alluded to, it's assumed.
Which is interesting because I didn't
Mm,
really get that until I read your notes. I was like, oh, it's never actually
yeah,
said in a literal sense. It's only
yeah,
an idea of
yeah.
certain things.
There's two of the things that he does that we know of that are actually explicit. One is his treatment of Sybil Vane, his
Mhm.
the actress who plays at the theater that he supposedly falls in love with and then later rejects completely. Um, and then also obviously the murder of his friend Basil. Those are the only two things that we actually
That
know
one he
of.
does do,
Yes,
the
yes,
casual
he is
murdering. Like,
a casual murder. Yeah,
he
that's
is
it.
a murderer.
So, so we know he's bad, but that also happens like right at the end almost, right? So there's this whole
Mm.
period of time in the middle of which Oscar Wilde is alluding to his bad behavior. And we get sort of hints at that with, people saying like, they left the room when he arrived and, and things like that. But we don't actually, it's not made explicit. But also there's many versions of this book and it
Mm.
was essentially censored, right? So there was a lot more intimate scenes, I suppose you could say, a lot more obvious homosexual references in the book when Oscar Wilde actually wrote it, and then he obviously going from manuscript to actually published. It was published in a magazine first. It was changed. Obviously, that was him sort of editing himself, and then of course his editor changed it as well. So there's a lot of stuff that you don't actually in the actual finished book. You don't see that. Um, but I also don't think you need to sort of get those references. And I think even the audiences at the time, Victorian readers at the time, probably understood it to a point. So I don't think it
He went
needs
to
to be
jail.
explicit. Well, that's
So
it, right? Yes.
they were like, this is evidence.
Yeah,
Therefore, into jail you go.
yeah. But I love those sort of parallel lines between like the actual book itself and Oscar Wilde saying things through characters like Lord Henry that essentially the book itself is or art itself is often taken as like the creator's own ideas and thoughts, and which is exactly kind of what happened to to Oscar Wilde as well. So it's kind of I love that like it's hard to separate that now for me. Um, but yeah, basically, I think with Dorian Gray, just living this double life where you see him on like one level, just kind of like, uh, you know, being this young, well, in the beginning young, and then even as he
Extremely
grows
charming.
older, yeah,
Yeah.
very charming. Prince Charming was his name,
Mhm.
and then behind the scenes doing all this pleasure seeking, hedonistic stuff.
It was certainly interesting. The What I loved about this is that his friends like didn't question him
Yeah,
not aging at all through like decades. There's like a couple of scenes where just passers by were like, "Oh, he's the devil," because we saw him 2 decades ago and he was
yeah.
still the same picture of youth and beauty. But Lord Henry's like, "Ah, it's normal, whatever. Like he's just a young man."
He's just
It's like,
beautiful.
why
What's
is
your
no one
secret?
questioning this? Yeah,
What are you
yeah,
eating?
he's just
Yeah,
beautiful, and that's all that matters. And we'll get into Lord Henry because I think characters in real life like Lord Henry can be quite dangerous, but you have a different interpretation. Um, a very reflective character, obviously. When we get to that, it would be interesting. But just this idea of putting all of your sins into something else and being the face of, and I think we deal with people like this in our lives, unfortunately, where they are the face of XYZ and we think that they're moral and they're beautiful, maybe not physically, but like in their souls and whatnot. And then behind closed doors, all this horrific shit is happening. And we've seen stories like this come out with people in our own worlds. And I won't name names here, but like this artist conversation comes into it somewhere as well, where it's like behind closed doors, we don't know what's happening, but in Dorian Gray's painting, he can see what's happening. They know what's going on. Yet on the outside, we're all being like, oh yeah, that person's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant to now, right? Because I feel like it's like all of these, like for example, these parties and these get-togethers that the upper class, the gentlemen, especially some, women as well, but
Mm-hmm.
these gentlemen's clubs and things like this, you would attend them to keep up appearances, and behind closed doors, other things would be would be happening. Um, but I feel like that's even more relevant today because it's very much the case that like I think especially a lot of like today's youth might feel a little bit like directionless, a little bit not sure what purpose their life should be taking. And yet you have all of these people, in the Victorian period who just kind of like, had so much money and so much social standing that they just didn't know what to do with it. So they just threw all these parties and it was
So,
very much
but
just
like,
like,
where did you all get your money? Like, where? Because all we read
yeah,
about is you going to people's houses and throwing parties and talking to one another and doing nothing.
yeah,
Like, where is all this money coming from?
yeah,
But that's a
it's
really
just
good
old
linking
money.
part to societal standing, which you've got here in the notes of themes. Um,
Yeah.
and people who are looked down upon for having less versus people who are well off, who are just going to these clubs and these things. And um, Lord Henry is a huge pusher for this keeping up appearances aspect of the story. Even when people like Basil, who is more humble, I would say, more middle class than someone like Lord Henry, and it's almost you can almost read it as Lord Henry taking pity on someone like a Basil. I'm like, oh, you'll never be able to get to my stature, but I will bring you into these worlds because I think it's fun for me. It's almost like he's playing with these
100%.
lesser characters. Um,
Like, yeah, making a complete game out of it, which is hilarious. Like I was in stitches in some of
he's
those
got to
parts.
he's got to entertain himself somehow.
100%, yeah. He's
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 very
literally
much
he's
plays
literally
with people.
yeah, he's that person that's like so well read and like he's read all the major works of philosophy and politics and just knows too much and then doesn't know what to do with that. So he's just like, making up his own little games in his head to kind of entertain himself.
We can read a lot into the satire of Lord Henry. I've just found a quote here where Lord Henry, because a lot of the really like good quotes come from
Oh,
this gentleman
almost all of them.
in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, is there are only two kinds of people who are really fascinating: people who know absolutely everything and people who know absolutely nothing. And that will give you an indicator of the kind of games that he is playing with the people around him. And it's almost everyone he's got under his thumb.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. This will be a precursor to what we talk about in a little bit with Lord Henry, but I do find it really interesting that he says all these things. Like you're right, he has all the best quotes, and I've highlighted so many of them. And he says all this stuff, and he knows all this stuff, and he plays with all these people and in their lives, and he kind of doesn't have any. He's very amoral, right? He doesn't concern himself with morals at all. Um, but also at the same time, he doesn't participate in any of that stuff. He's very much all talk. And then on the flip side, you have you have Dorian, who is uh, taking action with almost everything that Lord Henry
He's
says.
very
Yes,
influenced by.
but yeah, I freaking loved Lord Henry. He's one of my favorite characters ever now. But we'll come back to him because I do want to talk about him properly in a minute. I do want to talk though, just briefly. You mentioned misogyny as one of the themes and things that has bubbled up a lot in this book. And although I don't think it's like just because of the different time, like the Victorian period was very
Mm,
different the way women were treated. I do want to hear what you think about how the female characters were treated in this book because it is very, um, it kind of hit
it's
me
very
over the
male
head with a ton of
dominant.
bricks. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking of poor Sybil Vane in one instance where she is viewed as a plaything for pleasure, but again, she's used for a narrative purpose um, in this, but also her mother to an extent, and how the mother is spoken about as being working class and having to look after the son, and the son was obviously the highest standing child of the two of them, and Sybil Vane is, full of romanticism and silly for that, which didn't serve her well in the book, spoiler alert, for poor Sybil's fate. But there's also a scene, and I cannot remember the woman for the life of me, that has Lord Henry, Dorian Gray, and this older woman at a table. And I think this is where misogyny really comes into it for me, is how women speak about women in terms of these conversations that they're having, is because they're viewed as less than somehow. And I think you're right in that Lord Henry doesn't necessarily view the women around him as less than. He just sort of plays devil's advocate a lot, and some of the things that he says feels like he's just throwing them in the air to see what sticks and what gets reactions out of people, because that's what he does. But yeah, there's this woman in this book who is talking about youth and beauty when it comes to other women and trying to showcase them for Dorian's pleasure, who's quite uninterested in these things. But you're right, it's a very, very male-heavy book, and the gaze of the book is quite male-dominated.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I was prepared for that, and I don't know why, because it's obviously a product of its time, but, like, yeah, I was
Yeah, of
just
course.
I don't know, it's uncomfortable to read that now, like, you can read something and keep it within the time that it's written and take that into account, but it's still kind of uncomfortable to read that, and I don't know, it feels a bit
It's just
icky,
not how
and
we
it's hard.
view our worlds. Like, yeah, it's definitely a product of its time in there. But like, there's just little throwaways in there, which I guess what you're saying is uncomfortable, where it's like, oh, the things that women say don't matter. Like, it's only the things that men concern themselves with. And it's like, it's just not our lives. It's not our world that we live in, which is
Yeah.
good. We don't live in these worlds. But you're right, it can be quite uncomfortable to read these things. And it's, to go slightly off topic here, but what's new? It's why I won't read things like Ian Fleming. It's like, because there wasn't any reason for
Mm.
the misogyny
Mhm.
around the time these books were created. So, or Dresden Files to an extent, to bring it into a more modern context. And, we're told that there's a reason for someone like Dresden's misogyny because he grew up in a different time. I'm like, it's still a modern book, therefore I don't really want
Yeah.
to read about it in that context. Whereas with this, yes, it was created in the 19th century, so it's like, okay, well, this is how those societies acted. And I can actively understand that makes me feel yuck because it's not the world that I live in. Whereas, would I have acted differently in that time because these were the views of society at that time? And I think that a lot of classics do challenge some of those views, which is why they are classics. And I think this does try and challenge some of those views, but it's quite
Oh,
limited
yeah.
in scope because it is very much a story of Oscar Wilde. And if we go into his past and what he's exploring, it's very male dominated for a good reason because of
Yeah.
the queerness and the representation that he's trying to unpack here.
Absolutely. I think Oscar Wilde does a really good job of kind of showing you what's problematic with society. It's very
Mm,
much, there was a lot of that going on in Victorian times anyway with certain authors, but he's not actively challenging it. He's just showing you, oh, this is this is how it was, and also it's terrible, but also like none of the characters are rebelling against that. They're all just going along for the ride, but but
yeah.
it's there in the text.
One more that I want to talk about in terms of themes, and I think this will lead into the Lord Henry discussion, which you want to have, is this morality and influence
Hmm.
in terms of the duplicity of the self. So I found someone like Lord Henry to be a dangerous character, and I can think I know where you're going with the conversation that you want to have, but like I don't want to put words in your mouth. Um, is that someone like a Lord Henry who says all these things and has influence and is quite profound, but is very obviously playing games with the people around him and just sits back and watches the experimentation happen. Like, I'm going to put these views in your head, and we see the influence that he has on someone like Dorian Gray, who is young and very susceptible to the things that Lord Henry is doing. And Lord Henry doesn't hide the fact that he has very strong opinions and is very flippant with them, but he's watching what happens as a result of these things that he is saying. And he is a very fascinating character from a classic point of view. But I think we see this, and when we talk about in modern day context, we're talking about the new generation. So we're millennials. I'm now in my mid-30s. You're in your late 30s. We're seeing this new generation, not to age you,
Thanks for that. Look, you just had a
Sorry about
birthday,
that.
so you can now. You can age
Yeah.
yourself.
But we are seeing a new generation come in who is quite nihilistic, really, if we look at what Gen Z is coming in and seeing in the world. And then we have the new generation, Gen Alpha, and we're all influenced to a certain extent by the generations that come before us. And what we say or what our generation does will influence things down the line. And we're seeing that here with the relationship between Lord Henry and Grey, where he's saying these things flippantly. He's older, he's done things, he feels like he's got a moral high ground, doesn't give a shit anymore. And then someone like our young Dorian Gray is taking those things and becoming more and more corrupt because of those influences that have been passed down. And I think that's something that we can look at here in modern day society, or any generational split between, let's say one generation versus two down. And I found that quite interesting because it directly influences somebody's actions, but someone like Lord Henry's going, I don't give a fuck anymore. But then that has very real effects on the person taking those actions.
Yeah, 100%. I think, look, just to say it outright and plainly, I suppose, I think a lot of there's a lot of adaptations of the Picture of Dorian Gray in like film and obviously theatre and things. I watched the very beginning of the well-loved 1945 version, the film. It's got Angela Lansbury in it, which was kind of a trip to watch her in it. I couldn't watch the whole thing. I struggle with a lot of older films, although I can understand why people love it. But in the very beginning, they depict Lord Henry doing something quite you get an idea of his character by the actions that he takes in the beginning, where he catches this butterfly, and I don't think this is in the book, at least I don't recall. And I think he traps the butterfly, and then I don't know if he's drowning the butterfly in something. But anyway, you see this on the screen to kind of give you an indication of Lord Henry's character, and I feel like, and from what I've read, a lot of adaptations put a lot of emphasis on how Lord Henry as a character has corrupted Dorian Gray. And I didn't get that in the text. I very much read it like, yes, Dorian Gray was influenced by Lord Henry. Yes, there were a lot of things he was introduced to by Lord Henry. But at the same time, Dorian Gray and his own temperament, of which there is a line about, Dorian being corrupted by, mostly by his own temperament. It's basically his choice. He does things by his own choosing. He leads himself down that path. So that's where I really feel like, I don't know if it's just myself, the way I view everyone sort of having their own responsibility. Every individual is responsible in their own right. You can't blame other people for your actions, even if you're influenced by them. So I feel like Lord Henry, I don't see him as like he's an asshole. Don't get me wrong. He's horrible. He's an absolute jerk. He's a manipulative, too clever for his own good. He plays the game. He influences people.
He's bored.
Pretty much.
Just
he's purposeless.
A bored rich man who's throwing shit out into the wind and seeing what happens.
100%. Does that make him evil? I don't see it. And I think a lot of the adaptations kind of portray him as this kind of like, evil influence against for Dorian. But I don't really see it that way.
I don't know if I call him evil, but I would call him immoral.
Oh, absolutely. He's amoral. I wouldn't even call him immoral. I call him amoral. He's just not concerned with morals. He's just not.
You don't give a shit. No, he does have a turning point for me in this book, which the first time I read it, I don't think I really understood the nuance behind Lord Henry. And then the second time reading it, which was more recent, there are things that he says in this book where he challenges the things that Dorian Gray do? I guess to your point, where he might have put an idea in Dorian Gray's head, and I don't know whether this is just him playing the game and going, what if I challenge that thing that you've gone and done? Because you are susceptible to these things. Now, I agree with you that we as humans need to take responsibility for our actions. And we as humans can be susceptible to things that might align with the way that we feel fundamentally. But there was a challenge that Henry does bring up when we're talking about the love that he has for Sybil Vane. And I believe they're at a restaurant. They're sitting down, they're talking before going to a show. I think it's the night of Dorian Gray professing his love or proposing to Sybil Vane. Mm. And he says, tonight she's Imogen and tomorrow night she'll be Juliet. But where is Sybil Vane? No. So he's posing that challenge to say, who are you in love with? Are you in love with the art or the artist? And, Dorian goes on to romanticize that, she's all of these different creatures. And then when that is uncovered, that she's just a human being underneath the parts that she's playing, he's no longer interested. Which I think is an interesting contrast to where we're both coming from on Lord Henry.
Yeah. No, I think that's the foreshadowing, right? Like that whole scene, when that comes about, it becomes very clear that Dorian is not in love with Sybil Vane. He's in love with her acting and her art, like you said.
The idea.
Yeah.
And likewise, towards the end of the book, Lord Henry gifts a book which is never mentioned by name to Dorian Gray and says that, go and read this book. And the book has been, I forget the author. It's a French author. I will butcher the pronunciation, but the translation, I believe, is Against Nature, I think is the English translation of the title. So it's not confirmed in the book that this is what was given to Dorian Gray, but it is a story that was written in the 19th century as well, I think 40 or so years prior to Dorian Gray coming out, which Oscar Wilde was influenced by. And in the story is a gentleman who goes and plays with decadence. He's quite isolated. He's seeking indulgence. He's seeking pleasure above everything else in this isolated form. And Lord Henry suggests or sends this book to Dorian Gray, and then he is further corrupted, or it is, I guess, speculated he's further corrupted by this book. But instead of, and this may be another moment where Lord Henry's like, take a look at your fucking life, man. What are you doing? Whereas Dorian Gray's just not questioned those things. He says it turns him evil in the book, or that's what it's alluded to. And I thought that was quite interesting as well. Again, Lord Henry being like playing devil's advocate, being like, maybe take a look at some of the things you're doing, but I think you'll really enjoy this book. And Dorian Gray's like, this has corrupted me. Now it's just further corrupted the things that you've already. So I guess there's this idea of him not taking responsibility for
100%.
his own actions and pushing that on external things, whether it be people or artifacts.
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, there's a way you can read this book, and I guess what is more interesting to me when I read it is like this a psychological reading of it, the descent into madness and paranoia and maybe even psychopathy. There's arguments to be made for all of that, and you could say that the portrait is simply a symbol for for like a narrative device, I guess, for having that kind of story allowed to be told. I find that way more interesting. Again, this is why I think this book is so great, because you can read it that way. And I think that also there's a lot of parallels to that today, because that is something that a lot of people can relate to just because of the way of the world right now, right? There's just a lot of people are living a hedonistic lifestyle because they just want to shut everything else out. They're looking for pleasure because that's all that they hit. Yeah, there's too much other stuff going on.
What we have at the end of the day is, I mean, look, both of us have said in the past we need to turn the news off.
Yeah, 100%.
Because our brains just can't do it. We're going to go and play games or read books or whatever, because I just I can't. I actually don't have space in my brain on my life for these negative things that are happening.
Yeah. I found the quote, by the way, about his temperament, Dorian's temperament being predisposed to corrupting itself, basically. And so he shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he had wished to hide the picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence and the still more poisonous influence that came from his own temperament. So Oscar Wilde is actually explicit with, saying that Dorian is predisposed to, this way of being. So the text itself doesn't really point the finger at Lord Henry and say it's all his fault, but I think a lot of adaptations have kind of taken that interpretation, I suppose. I feel like there's a lot of Oscar Wilde in Lord Henry. There's like a whole the art for art's sake aesthetic movement of which Oscar Wilde was a part of anyway. But I think where my view on Lord Henry is that he's very much taking a lot of, and again, this is what we think Oscar Wilde, we don't know for sure. There's a lot of letters and stuff that we've got. I think wasn't there like the original text surfaced about, it wasn't even that long ago. It was like 15 years ago. We only had the magazine copy
version,
and then and then the published version. So we can see this progression of Oscar Wilde's own censorship and his own rewriting, and then the editor's notes and stuff like that. But there's all of that into Lord Henry as well, because Lord Henry is kind of, in a way, the voice of reason in a perverse kind of way, because he has this view of Victorian society that a lot of people around him they can't see it. They're blind to it. They're living their lives. They're a part of it. Lord Henry is able to, and again, not that I agree with the things that he says. He's horrible and he's an asshole, very misogynistic.
At least we agree that Lord Henry is a shithead.
But he can see the society, and he knows, like he's saying to Dorian Gray, your youth and your beauty, you have to keep that at all costs. That's the most important thing. And he's not wrong, because that's how society views youth and beauty, So he has these views that are twisted and corrupt, but at the same time, he's kind of right, and he knows what's going on, and he knows what's going to get someone far in life. So you can't fault him for that.
I don't know if I fault him. I just think he's a shit.
Yeah.
I do, just for the sake of time, let's jump into the art for art's sake. And I found a quote that I wanted to read from the text regarding this. So maybe before we jump into the preface of the book, which is like one sentence, very powerful, I think that's where you're going. Again, don't let me put words in your mouth. But there is a quote in the book, and what we're talking about here is, can art, or you say books, but can art be moral or immoral, or are they completely amoral, as Wilde believes? And he's quite unapologetic in that belief in the introduction of the book. But there is a quote here that says, "Even now, I cannot help feeling that it is a mistake to think that the passion one feels in creation is ever really shown in the work one creates. Art is always more abstract than we fancy. Form and colour tell us of form and colour. That is all. It often seems to me that art conceals the artist far more completely than it ever reveals him."
Yeah.
So, is art moral or amoral? Where do you fall? Or what's the preface of the book?
Yeah, well, look, Oscar Wilde's preface of, I think this is the thing that I knew of Dorian Gray before reading the book. I'd not read the book, but I'd read this preface to the book before, because it's quite famous.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't read the whole thing, but it starts with, "The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim." And it's basically a series of just single sentences. And a lot of this is part of the aesthetics movement, of which Oscar Wilde was a part of, and obviously argued a lot of this, but also at the same time, the book itself is kind of arguing the opposite. So we don't really have a clear idea of what Oscar Wilde believed, and whether his view of that changed throughout his life as well, especially because he was in jail, and I'm sure one's views would change quite drastically. But I mean, he says, for example, in the preface, "No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style." He like there's certain things he's talking about beauty, and he says explicitly there is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. But then you read Dorian Gray, and it's like, well, he's arguing the opposite because
Yeah.
it's
That book, yeah, question mark. I've been
so
corrupted by the art.
yeah. So I think look, I think there are some people who still believe in art for art's sake, and I wouldn't call myself one of them. I think it's a harder argument to make now today,
Mhm.
just because we have so much. There's a lot of art that contains a call to action, like an imperative. There's something that you're calling people to do to make change. And I'd even argue, to be fair, like I think even this book kind of has a little bit of that. But I'm not so sure that I can take what Oscar Wilde says at face value. I think he's kind of being a little bit cheeky, perhaps, and a little bit contradictory. Again, because
I mean,
there's a
it's
lot of himself in Lord
satire,
Henry.
so,
Yeah,
is it his actual beliefs or is he playing with us?
yeah, that's it. And I still
And
don't
telling
know
us to
where I
question
sit
those
on that.
things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I'm similar. Like, when that question at face value is posed to me, I don't know. I think it's always up to interpretation of the person who the art is presented to and what we pull from it. I believe that the artist is separate to the person viewing the art, and you're right that most art is done for a reason that is usually quite personal to the person who is creating that work. Um, and there's a quote in the introduction here, which I believe Oscar Wilde actually said in response to a critic of the work. And it says, "The sphere of art and the sphere of ethics are absolutely distinct and separate. Art is superior to nature and to life, and aesthetics are always higher than ethics." I was like, so there's a lot of stock in something beautiful, but I think what we see now in art is a reflection of journey, messages that people are trying to get across. I think there's
yeah,
so much power, and there's always been so much power in creative works, which is why we're also against AI. We don't want to take that from human; it makes it much less human. I think that the intention behind art can be moral or amoral, but there is always going to be parts of the artist and their thoughts and their feelings, and where we deem that on that scale is going to be different for every person, how we read the interpretation of those things. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree that art is one way or the other. I always think art is going to be open to interpretation of the viewer and the artist.
yeah. Absolutely. And I think, look, I think this book proves that that is the case, that it's not just a book full of nice prose that you can enjoy and then you put away and you don't think about again. Because the fact that it's still being read 135 years later, I think completely proves the point that books can be moral or immoral. I think, yes, they're always going to be open to interpretation. Of course, we have different ways of reading this book. We've talked about some of them. You and I have different ideas of what this book is, how it's affected us and why it's still good or not good. But I think because at the end of reading it, you're kind of given a snapshot of what is the the worst way to live one's life. Here's what not to do, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's how not to live your life. Here's how to go through the fast lane to an early death, right? So I think in
If
that
someone
regard,
offers you a painting of yourself beautiful, don't do it. Don't
don't
take
do
it.
it. Don't do it.
Don't do
Yeah.
it.
I think so. Regardless of what Oscar Wilde has said, whether in the preface or through other letters and correspondence elsewhere, I think the fact that this book is, still uh, treated with such respect and adoration so many years later, I think that kind of, in a way, kind of proves the opposite. That yes, you can have a book that contains morals or can be read in a moral way. Um, which is interesting, right? Because when he went to trial, like one of the things he was sort of arguing was that books aren't moral or immoral. It's just a book. You can't hold that against me. But also, I think in the Victorian period, I think a lot of people would take this book and saying this is what Oscar Wilde believes. They can't separate or couldn't
Mhm.
separate that as well as we can today. But yeah, I'm certainly not one that believes in art for art's sake. I think there is objective beauty in art. I think you can point to something and say that is beautiful. That is great art that is objectively good. I do believe that, but I also don't think it's one or the other. I think, of course, you can read things in different ways, and there is always going to be a part of the creator of the art in the art itself. I don't think you can completely separate those two things.
Why we put critical thinking pretty high up, right?
Absolutely. I am curious, just as sort of to wind down the discussion a little bit, what your takeaway of this book is today. Like, having read it now, do you come away feeling like it is a book that will sort of inform your life in some way, or is it one of those books you read it and you enjoyed it and that's it? Do you think you'll be thinking about it and what it contains and whatever message you got from it for years to come?
I view this book as almost a warning to not miss out on things that are beautiful, that may not be aesthetic. So I have reflected on this book for 15 years now, maybe coming up to 20. And I think I will continue to reflect on the ideas in the book for a very long time. And what I mean by not missing out on things is not getting so caught up in what people think of me or the world around me, and letting myself experience things that maybe aren't beautiful to others. And I don't want to get so bogged down in the idea that I have to do XYZ to remain a certain way. But what I do want to do is to make sure I'm taking note and I'm reflecting on things that maybe other people don't think are as beautiful or as desirable, and making sure that the actions that I do take mean something to me. So I don't want to do things just for the sake of somebody else has this idea that this action would be more preferable to one or the other. I want to make sure that I'm doing things that matter to me and not somebody like a Lorne Hedry who is influencing and who I'm trying to impress. Are the actions that I'm taking actions that are reflective of myself, or are they influenced by other people? And I think that is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, interesting. And that's something you've taken away from this reading rather than your earlier reading 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think very
Or
much
both?
more reflective now, ironically, in this reading of it. And like, I think I'll read it again in another 10 years' time, and maybe I'll get something from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is one of those books because it's short enough as well that you don't have to, it's not a commitment. I do often think about, now that I've read it, I often think about like whether, if I'd have read it as a younger person, what I would have thought of it, and whether it would have influenced me or not, which is always interesting because the book is about being influenced. And I'm considering, like, would I have been influenced by this book? I agree with you. I think it is a warning, which is why I think it does have like a moral imperative of some kind. Like, I do think that is easy to see within this book. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of glad I got to read it now, to be able to appreciate it in a way that I know I wouldn't have years ago. But also, like I said at the beginning, I'm way more interested in like the different ways of reading it and the discourse around the book rather than just the book itself. So I don't know, I guess that's where I've gotten my enjoyment from it more than just the story on a surface level. But there's a lot. It's kind of deceptively it's a story about deception and deceit, and it is deceptively quite complex, even though it's quite short.
I think that's a lot of classics, to be honest. They're all quite short when we think of the books that we go and read, like The Stand. Just 1,300 pages, but just how
just a measly 1,300.
But just how much is said in what 250?
Yeah.
In this, and I mean the writing is gorgeous as well. Like, it's so beautifully written.
Can we just talk about that for a second? I was completely floored. Obviously, Oscar Wilde is a poet and playwright, and you can tell. But my goodness, it is something else, and it's also kind of there's this motif that is throughout the whole book as well. It's kind of like the motif of like a play that's taking place, or characters in a play. Yeah. And you that pattern, you see this over and over. And I feel like the book itself is kind of like that. Like, it feels like a play itself, because of the way the characters talk and just like the dialogue and the choices that he's made. I loved it.
It does certainly feel like dramatic scenes are taking place on a stage in front of you, and you're a witness to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was very, very dramatic in that way. But also not sentimental, because I think the sentimentality of that time and sort of there was a movement away from sentimentality, and you could tell as well. And that's Oscar Wilde trying to get
I
out
can't
of
imagine Lord Henry being sentimental at all.
that. No, not at all. Well, thank you for tuning into today's episode. Notes to everything that we talked about in the rewatch play will be in the show notes, of course, so you can check those out. And you can find the show at Genre Blender Podcast on YouTube and in your podcast player of choice. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this and you want to support us just on our YouTube channel. It helps us out a ton, obviously. But we also have our website, which is genreblender.net. And there's a newsletter you can subscribe to and also get your new episode notifications through that way as well. If social media is your thing, we're Genre Blender Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. I believe we're back on there, I think.
We sure are.
And genreblender.net on Blue Sky.
Cool. To all the world hoppers out there, we wish you safe travels, and we will catch you in the next episode where we're going to be talking about Tiny Bookshop, which is taking the cozy world by storm in the gaming sphere. But until then, bye.
See y'all.